Hey everybody, can I have your attention please? If you could not connect to the Wi-Fi at church, it would help us out. With this many devices, we're having a little bit of trouble with the Zoom session. So please don't connect to the Wi-Fi if you can avoid it right now. Thanks.
All right, please come in and take a seat. Hey, Shelley, is it easy enough to show full screen on of our folks on Zoom here? I'd love to see who's with us this morning. It's probably in speaker view right now or something. We'll give everyone a few seconds to settle down. I actually wonder what's going on in the kitchen, that it's a little disruptively noisy. If they need to work, they can slide down the sliders. Alan can do that. Well, that's fine, Alan. You stopped what you're doing. There, thank you. Yeah. There they are. All right, great to see everybody on Zoom with us this morning too. There's so many of you that it's like looking at ants, but you're an attractive colony at that. So we can walk up and look at it when we need to. But great to have everyone here. We're gonna do some listening this morning, and then a chance for some questions and comments in a little bit later. I do want to ask before we start, if, silence your cell phones, that would be great. But if you would also open them up And if your Wi-Fi is on, if you would turn the Wi-Fi off, that would be great, because it interferes with the signal and hampers our friends on Zoom just a little bit. If you're on Zoom, you can keep your Wi-Fi on. Thank you for that adjustment. And I also want to welcome everybody who's here for this really what is a historic event in many ways. What a wonderful day we had together yesterday. How good it was to be amongst Unitarians and feel like we were amongst Unitarians. Unitarians from many places, many distant places coming together, and this is what our religion is about and what it's supposed to feel like. So give yourselves a hand, I think, for... I also want to welcome our guest who may be here today, especially this morning to hear our keynote speaker. Thank you to the Spokesman Review for representing and being here and covering this event. We appreciate that. Are there any local Braver Angels that are with us? Yes, hey, there he is. There's Shane. Thank you. There's another. Good. Great. Well, I think everybody is excited to be here because you've all read a bit about our speaker, John Wood Jr. I'm going to do a little bit of his formal bio anyway, because there may be some who aren't familiar with it, and I think it's great since this is being recorded. I guess we have your permission to record this. Yes. Great. Thank you. And so for the future's sake, people can look back and say, "Oh, wow, what an impressive man." By the way, John, people have been saying ever since you agreed to come, "How did you get him?" Score! You really scored. I feel the same way, and I'll say why in just a minute. But formally, John is, as you know, is a leading figure of the American depolarization movement. If you even knew there was such a movement, how relieved we are to find out, right? He's a national ambassador for Braver Angels, the United States' largest grassroots bipartisan organization dedicated to political depolarization. Hands please for Braver Angels. As such, he is a nationally recognized public speaker on the subjects of political and racial reconciliation. He's spoken across America to a wide range of the nation's most respected think tanks, universities, corporations, philanthropic organizations, and political associations, including the Aspen Institute, the Manhattan Institute, CPAC 2019, Global Philanthropy Forum, the Philanthropy Roundtable, Upswell, Target, General Mills, Lucasfilms. Did you say hi to Darth Vader? Thank you. And on we can go about that. Prior to his work with Braver Angels, he was the state of California's youngest active nominee for Congress in the 2014 election cycle, challenging Maxine Waters in California's 43rd district. His unifying campaign was covered by outlets including the National Review and the Larry Elder Show. After the election, Wood was elected as second vice chairman of the Republican Party of Los Angeles, the largest Republican county party in the country. You may want to know that the first minister of this church back in 1888, Edwin Willock, was the founder of the Republican Party in Texas. Yes. That's back. Save that one for Jeopardy. Say that for Jeopardy. We like to say that. We like to say that's back when the Republicans were Democrats. But actually, it's wonderful to share that history. And so in addition, again, to Braver Angels, he's an advisor to the American Project, an initiative of the Pepperdine School of Public Policy, dedicated to restoring the communitarian roots of conservatism, the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, the 1776 Unites Project, is a member of the Progress Network, an initiative of the New American Foundation, and is a field builder with the New Pluralist Collaborative coalition group focused on connecting and supporting organizations committed to depolarization and social justice. He's worked in support of educational opportunities for at-risk youth in inner cities, in the inner city of Los Angeles, in the areas of tutoring and private education, and he sits on the board of directors for Strive Arts and Academics, a celebrated private educational facility in South Los Angeles. So that's some of the formal stuff. I'm going to leave out some of the other interesting things, including being a musician and a singer and raised in a famous musical family. So when I emailed John, letting him know that we were searching for, on rather short notice, a keynote speaker, and I had emailed actually a few individuals, John very quickly and very enthusiastically said, "I'm in." And he talked about his usual fee and said, but that's negotiable because I want to be there. In fact, if it's okay, I want to come in person. Because this is precisely the kind of group that I want to talk to. A way of combining his spiritual life, his spiritual longings and spiritual interest with those deeper questions of the challenges that we face as a society, both the polarization and continuing, I should say, inequalities in our country, including racial inequality. And that this is the place that he wants to be able to talk about that in a way that's honest, and yet, in his words, honors the liberal principles our country was founded upon. Those progressive values that most of us in this room, if not all of us, are committed to. And I really thought, how difficult it's been. We've had some examples. Joyce has helped us through some alternative ways of thinking about anti-racial or racial justice, I should say. And UMIAC, you use for Multiracial Action Committee, is also approaching it in a more harmonious, depolarized way. But because our own association, our former association, has referred to us as racist every time we disagreed with a particular approach, I think we've become challenged in even addressing the issue. We don't know how to address it anymore without fear of being called the very opposite of what we are. And racist, and to have somebody so enthusiastic about being here to help us through this is very special. It shows, I think, the passion and commitment that John has for the work, the good work, the great work that he's doing in our world. And in the couple of hours we've been able to visit with each other over a sandwich and a beer. He had the sandwich, I had the beer. I found him to be an incredibly thoughtful person. And for those who were here for my presentation last night on the Kukara Dojo, you understand what I mean by thoughtful, right? I'm talking about somebody who has incredible intellectual intelligence and incredible emotional intelligence, and that those are harmonized in a way that makes him a profoundly whole human being. And so I am extremely honored and grateful to be able to present to you our historic first ever NAUA keynote speaker, Mr. John Wood, Jr. Thank you, brother. Really
appreciate it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I am as happy to see all of you as I take it some of you are to see me. And I do have to say that as grateful as I am for Todd's incredibly generous introduction, I fear that the bar has been raised to heights that I cannot possibly clear. So that's always the risk when people like you. And goodness gracious, Todd was reading through the introduction. He got about halfway, and I was like, I don't even remember about a third of those things, I think. And so, I hope folks don't feel too inundated right off the bat. But I do have to say that I'm deeply warmed by the invitation and the spirit of hospitality that I've been presented with here. And so thank you very kindly for that. And that may be an appropriate place to make an observation. We live in a moment in American society of intense and fiery passions, conviction applied to social and political causes to rescue America from the demons that are our partisan enemies, tends to be the theme and spirit with which we approach the politics of the moment in a democracy that really functions best when it's grounded upon a culture of understanding, patience, and a willingness to reason together across our divides. But in a climate of hostility such as we experience today, it is easy for Americans of all colors and all stripes politically to feel themselves disenchanted, isolated, alienated, not just from the people who they may always have disagreed with or been removed from culturally, but even from people who they had felt closeness and familiarity with, philosophical compatriots, family and friends, because we have entered an era of American life where somehow or other differences in a democracy add up to zero-sum conflicts between our very identities and maybe even our very existence. And this is a posture that cannot be sustained in a constitutional republic that may yet have a chance of withstanding the test of time. And so, as I was talking with one of you about before I came up here, I look at the work of Braver Angels, the work of many organizations dedicated to reviving trust in our social fabric. And indeed, this noble enterprise, the North American Unitarian Association, as being dedicated to the cause of reviving our memory and our commitment to the fundamentals of democracy, the fundamentals of civic society, and maybe even within that, the fundamentals of human relationships. How it is we must be inclined to treat each other and look at one another and feel towards one another in order to create the space for us to reasonably and charitably confront the most difficult problems that face us, while still maintaining the relationships that undergird the stability of society and the potential for human progress. So I'm very pleased, of course, that within this group, we have some of my spiritual kinfolk at Braver Angels, so to speak, civic spiritual kinfolk at Braver Angels here in the crowd. I saw a couple of y'all here. I think my friend in the hat here, and I saw somebody else over in the corner. Hi there. One of the reasons I was eager to accept this invitation is because Unitarians have been a tremendous part of Braver Angels community since the very beginning. And yet I think this is my first time ever speaking to an organized body of Unitarians, and I hope that it's not the last, whether it is this particular body or others, whatever differences may currently exist within members of this larger church. But it does make it appropriate for me, I think, to say a little bit more about Braver Angels, about what Braver Angels is and our mission and approach to divisions in society. So I'll take just a brief moment to do that here. Braver Angels, for which I'm National Ambassador, is America's largest grassroots bipartisan organization, as Todd mentioned, committed to bridging the partisan divide, depolarizing our politics. But I really like to deepen that by saying that what we're really about is reviving the communal fabric of American democracy. We started in the aftermath of the 2016 election with a single workshop that we would use to bring together small folks from the right and from the left, reds and blues, as we say in-house, not to argue or debate politics, principally speaking, at least not at first, but to speak from the vantage point of their own personal experience in terms of why they see politics the way that they do. Basically, it was marriage counseling for the relationship between Republicans and Democrats, which, probably feels appropriate. And from that humble starting point, we have become an organization with about going on 14,000 members across the country, evenly bipartisan in our leadership and our sources of philanthropic support with programs in Congress, state and local government, college campuses across America, even some high schools, digital media content, podcasts and articles and videos, an arts community that includes singers and songwriters and performers that use their craft as a means of more deeply creating cultural connection across the divide. But again, fundamentally, we are grassroots at Braver Angels with about upwards of 100 or so local bipartisan alliances, local chapters, but we call them alliances, polka-dotted across America, including one in Seattle, and there may be others in the state of Washington as well. And I encourage folks to look into both Braver Angels locally and in the state and nationally for anybody who is inclined to join us in our efforts and to deepen what has been from the very start an inspired relationship that exists between the Unitarian community at large and the civic community of Braver Angels. But having said that, and having framed some of the strange of the moment in the context of the alienation that has become pervasive within the American family, and as we sadly note within the Unitarian family, I do want to say a little bit to frame my own sort of personal entryway into this larger cause. Todd had mentioned a little bit about my political background. It's true that I was a Republican nominee for Congress way back, 2014 or so, 10 years ago. I also grew up a liberal activist opposing the Iraq War. I was somebody who felt jaded after George W. Bush won re-election, worked very hard to elect Barack Obama in 2008, wound up studying conservatism in an effort to bring Republicans and conservatives into the Obama movement, discovered that from a policy vantage point in a number of cultural ways, I was in fact sort of a moderate conservative myself, but I still believed in what I felt to be the anti-tribal spirit of hope and change. That 2008 campaign and that 2004 keynote address that Barack Obama delivered at the Democratic National Convention, in which he said that we are not red states or blue states, but the United States of America, that we are not a black, white, or Latino America, but the United States of America. To me, that was the real cause of the Obama campaign. And so I actually ran as a Republican, as a hope and change Republican in South Los Angeles, and did so very, very earnestly and sincerely. But I was young, and so when people would ask me, what at the age of 26, and I should say that the district, the California 43rd, Maxine Waters district, it just so happened to be, predominantly Democrat, predominantly black and brown, but with strong pockets of conservatives in South Bay, in the parts of South Bay, LA County that were represented in the district. And so whether I was speaking to a black Democratic-leaning church in South Central Los Angeles or to a white Tea Party club in South Bay, LA County, people would ask me, well, what at your age makes you qualified to represent a district as diverse and complicated as the California 43rd. And I'd say, well, I come from an interesting family background. My mother is a liberal black Democrat from inner city Los Angeles. My father's a conservative white Republican from Tennessee. I grew up explaining my father to my mother to my father, and that's why I can represent all of you. Right. And it tended to be good for a laugh, and sort of summed up where I was coming from. Because in an era of American politics in which we have come to view Democrats and Republicans as the enemy, for me, fundamentally, Democrats and Republicans are simply mom and dad. And so, I have lived a life at the middle of various intersections that has made it incumbent upon me to try and see the humanity in very different groups of people, if only to be able to see the humanity in myself. And so that is a little bit of my story. Now, to try and bring it bring it down to this place a little bit. There is a fascinating history to the Unitarian Church that I am just starting to become mindful of. And I was reading a little bit of Todd's work that I guess got him into trouble in the first place. And it's remarkable to read the story of a church that has traveled the ages in a spirit of commitment to a humanism rooted in an appreciation of, in the very origins of the Christian tradition, a rootedness in an appreciation of the humanity of Christ that sets a full-bodied example for the way in which reason must spring from a place of understanding and compassion in the way we actually pursue the art of discussion in a modern and contemporary society. That's a fascinating way of engaging the world, because there's a way in which the values of our society have evolved in certain quarters so as to value intelligence of intellect without a corresponding commitment to the realizing of human dignity and the emotional connections we share with one another. Martin Luther King Jr., who I want to speak about at some length today, said that we are all heirs to a legacy of human dignity. And indeed, the foundation of Dr. King's philosophy of nonviolence rested upon the principle of agape love, this idea that love is a spiritual force that can affect social transformation, and that agape love, not a sentimental or affectionate love necessarily, but an overarching goodwill for your opponent, carries with it a power to speak to the conscience of our opposition, to the conscience of those who disagree with us, such that we may be able to signal to them that disagreement and even moral opposition in the context of a particular issue does not make us enemies. That we do not seek the truth, we do not seek to defeat our opponents politically because we seek to defeat them indeed, but rather we seek to win a society that is allied to truth and love for the sake of our enemies as well as ourselves, as well as our friends. And so Dr. King said that we do not seek to defeat or humiliate the opponent, we do not seek to defeat or humiliate the white man, but to win his friendship and his trust so that we may be reconciled to one another in the beloved community. I see the fundamental disposition of the Unitarian tradition as striving towards the beloved community. But we cannot strive towards the beloved community unless we are able to travel the length of the tensions of our disagreements in a spirit of love and understanding. And I note that in Todd's book, in his essay on race, and Todd, I'm not going to get the quotation exactly right, but you make reference to reason and thought as a type of productive love. Why? Because reason is not something that we actually properly do just within ourselves alone in a solitary capacity. Reason is something that we engage in communally, in conversation with one another. But in order to reason, we have to be willing to do more than talk. We have to be willing to listen. And you cannot listen effectively to people unless you are willing to genuinely hear them in a spirit of understanding, in a spirit that says that even though they might be wrong, I myself as an individual am almost certainly wrong in any number of things, and that therefore is humility that recognizes the fallibility of humanity, but our collective capacity to aspire towards truth and a more perfect way of being in the world requires me to acknowledge your dignity by hearing what you have to say. Not because we are... Not because you or I are perfect, but precisely because you and I am not perfect. But together we can be more perfect if we listen to each other. Now, these are, I think, principles and pieces of wisdom that are inherent in the Unitarian tradition that I see as echoing in the work of Brave Angels and indeed in the substance of the nonviolent philosophy of Martin Luther King Jr. But of course, the challenge that faces all principles in general is that they do have to make contact with the substance of social and political and human problems in their particulars. And race is an area of American life and American history that we know is broadly tragic in so many respects and has many particular realities that have to be wrestled with. We don't have time here for a comprehensive disquisition on the subject, but I do want to talk a little bit about what I know about African American history and the African American experience in this country as a way of offering some perspective as to how collectively we might all engage in discourse on matters of race. With not just a little more context, but a good deal more commitment to empathy on all sides. And this is my message to the United States of America, and certainly to my friends in the Unitarian Church and all sides of the current controversies, recognizing the fact that I am a newcomer to this space. And so I offer a little bit of my overall perspective in the hopes that it may be helpful. The Black American experience is not one that is well understood in its broader dimensions if you're only taking a left or right narrative kind of look at it. We've seen the 1619 Project versus 1776 narrative play out where the fundamental questions are, well, is America a white supremacist nation that is systemically racist, or is it a country in which you, by virtue of your merit and your dedication, can achieve the American dream no matter the color of your skin? And like with most complicated things, the truth is yes, no, neither, and both. But I tell the story in this way, to start in broad historical terms, of course. I mean, we, of course, know that, slavery arrived on American shores in the context of what used to be called Negro slavery in 1619, and hence the 1619 Project, when a small group of slaves were brought into the very beginnings of colonial America. And we know that that story progresses into the founding of the United States of America, in which slavery remains, the Civil War, in which the Emancipation Proclamation was declared, slavery eventually abolished, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments passed and affirmed, and yet freed African Americans were generally released into a period of not just poverty, not just lack of education, but actual terrorism from members of the Ku Klux Klan and defeated and demoralized and outraged and deeply traumatized people in in the postbellum South. This history continues into the 20th century, where things like redlining and segregation in the labor force constricts the opportunities of African Americans, and yet thriving African American communities and families do emerge across different parts of the United States. A black intelligentsia sort of rises and forms and begins to culminate in its effort in the mid-20th century civil rights movement, or the inspired leadership of certainly Martin Luther King Jr., but many others. A number of organizations, not just the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, but the NAACP, the Urban League, and others, rallied together, but as led by Martin Luther King Jr., in an effort not just to seek legal reform in American society, but to advance a vision of what it means to live up to the words of the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal, to realize the true values and teachings of the American founding, to honor the genuine legacy of Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, I would argue, and certainly Abraham Lincoln, generation or so afterwards. And so you had the passage of the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, eventually the Fair Housing Act after that. And even with the death of Martin Luther King Jr., and maybe in a way charged by it, you had a larger cultural commitment in American mainstream society towards recognizing and celebrating the dignity and worth of African Americans. You had an expanded black middle class that suddenly found a place of influence in American universities and in the political parties, in American corporations, and certainly athletics and entertainment. And that black middle class grew over the 70s and the 80s and the 90s in a way to where it flourishes in many respects, even while income inequality and all manner of statistical differences between the black middle class and the white middle class still persist. But in comparison to the history that we are trailing behind us, progress has been undeniable for this black middle class. What gets lost in that story oftentimes, though, is that for the remaining, and how you quantify this is a matter of some discussion. But let's say for a remaining 20 or 30% of the African American community, in an era where the gains of the civil rights movement that predominantly accrued to the rural South were already taking place in a moment of time where the bulk of African Americans had already moved out of the South and into major urban centers, the pre-existing conditions of poverty were not ameliorated by having won the right to vote all over again in the rural South, or by having desegregated lunch counters or even schools. But that pre-existing condition of poverty, demoralized even further by the death of prominent African American leaders, found itself more impacted by the advent of crack cocaine and heroin into American inner cities, by the departure of manufacturing jobs overseas, and the economic dislocation of African Americans in the agricultural and the service sectors having to do with changes in immigration policy and demographic shifts that took place in historically black communities. The advent of the drug economy fueling the growth of gang activity in African American communities, but that precipitating an often corrupt and deeply militaristic response from law enforcement, supported in a bipartisan way by the politicians of the era, that resulted in the mass incarceration phenomenon that has carried over from the 70s to accelerating the 80s, reaching a pinnacle in the mid-1990s, but even into the 2000s, resulting in a status quo in which at the same time you have an expanding black middle class in America, you have a black underclass and an imprisoned class that has also grown. And for those African Americans whose African American lineage, therefore, travels from slavery to white terrorism in the South, to redlining and discrimination in the labor unions, to a civil rights movement whose gains did not altogether accrue to them, to the mass incarceration phenomenon and dislocation, all the way up to the present day, for many of these African Americans, it is hard to find a point on that timeline where the American dream genuinely shows up. And so this is a larger sense of the arc to that story which explains a little bit about where people, in their emotional commitment to social justice, are oftentimes, if we're being charitable in our interpretation of that passion, it gives a sense of what people are feeling, even if they don't know all the details of that history. When they feel like they need to throw caution to the wind and burn bridges and relationships with the people who used to matter most to them in order to advocate for what they feel to be a historic cause of justice. We have to understand that because it is rooted in something. Now, I tell that story in a different way and in a much shorter way. Also, I'm an African American, half African American, but I'm a black man. I grew up in Culver City, California, very liberal, progressive, multicultural communities. Matter of fact, the school district I went to was ranked the 4th most diverse school district in America. I live where the motion picture studios are generally concentrated. Most of them are not actually in Hollywood, they're in Culver City, California. And I tell people, I grew up in King's Promised Land in a very real way. I grew up, again, in a biracial, multicultural family and community. It's not just black, white. I've got cousins who are Brazilian, Belizean, and Mexican, et cetera. And if anything, I felt like I was sort of celebrated for the color of my skin. It seemed to symbolize something to people about sort of where America had come to. But I tell people about my memory of the riots in 1992, in the aftermath of the Rodney King beatings, the Los Angeles riots, which set so much of Los Angeles, and particularly Black Los Angeles, ablaze in the aftermath of that tragic incident. And I tell people that, for me, that is a vague memory of the shadow of tension in my mind. I can remember my father pacing about, being worried. I can remember seeing disturbing things on the news. I remember my mother drove to work one day, and she came back, and my father seemed afraid, and I didn't altogether understand why. And he told me years later, he said, where she worked was near enough to the violence to where I was afraid that I might never see her again. And I said to myself, damn it, why did I let her go? But she came back just like she always did, and everything was fine. 15 minutes and 15 miles away, however, in the Jordan Downs project in Watts, the woman who would eventually become my wife was living in an American war zone, having to lie on the floor in case bullets should pass through the window, smelling the smoke from fires burning, hearing the howling screams of sirens passing back and forth, people shouting and screaming outside for 3 days. And in a life growing up in that neighborhood, what for a long time was the most violent neighborhood in the state of California. My wife, over the course of her years growing up, saw more violence and perhaps more death that some people see serving in Iraq and Afghanistan. Her American story and her memory of it began in an American war zone, in the most prosperous city, in the most prosperous state, in the most prosperous country in the world. We are both black people, but products of different streams of the black lineage, of this black history that I've laid out. And so the complexity of the black experience in America has to be seen in that way, as well as the complexity and sometimes sort of partial understanding reflected in the way many white people respond to that history. Because there are pieces of it which most black people don't know and most white people don't know, because we don't have a culture that allows us to talk about these things reasonably and comprehensively, because we must partition parts of the truth so that they may be the property of polarizing political narratives. And that's what we have to get beyond. So I understand when people are of a mind to say that we can't waste time on reasoned discussion when the priority of representation is something, inequity, are things that we must stand behind in order to break the hold of white supremacy on society. But it is still a reductive narrative, which would be okay if we had a culture in which we were willing to listen to different points of view. The need to be able to run institutions and organizations in a way that allows people to prioritize the standards and the principles and the virtues that go in to animating, whether it is a ministry, whether it is a corporation, whether it is an organ of government, that prioritizes people's values and their ability to serve in a given position, irrespective of the color of their skin, is a liberal value worth defending. But it should come with a concomitant societal dedication to making sure that the most disadvantaged among us have access to the resources, to the education, to the community institutions, to the social networks that allow them to develop within themselves the capacities to do what we all know that all Americans of all colors are capable of doing, which is to live up to their God-given potential to succeed in their own merits and in their own rights. This doesn't mean that diversity cannot be a meaningful consideration in matters of hiring and creating cultures of education in college and university campuses. But if we believe that, let's make the proactive argument for that. Rather than saying that somebody who has a different point of view on the relative importance of diversity for diversity's sake and the qualifications and criteria by which we base our hiring decisions or our recruiting decisions in any particular American institution does not have legitimate concerns about the way in which we honor the role and obligation of our institution in society, but rather is just reflecting an unconscious white racism. That is not likely to be true. And I don't think it's true for the North American Unitarian Association. I think that you, like all of us, are wrestling with deeply complicated sociological realities set against the backdrop of a deeply fraught and challenging American history in an age where our leading political interests are robbing us of the ability to wrestle with complexity in good faith across the divide. And many of you feel like you've been alienated and ostracized because you are trying to stay loyal to your principles while still recognizing the humanity of others in that context. And I want to tell you, your moral courage and strength is not in vain, because there are people across America, left and right, black and white, who feel exactly the way you do, even if they don't necessarily share all of your religious beliefs and all of your politics. Together, we can make the space for a consciousness to emerge in this society that allows us to wrestle with complexity together, that allows us to reason together as iron sharpens iron, and that allows us to strive towards the beloved community and the promised land that Dr. King foresaw in a spirit of goodwill and agape love. And with that, I thank you all for bringing me here today, and I'm happy to take a question or two. Thank you very much. Thank you. And I don't know how the question asking is going to work. I presume people will raise their hand and somebody will, maybe Todd will.
Check. Yeah, I've got the microphone, so I'll walk around. And thank you so much. I would ask that folks, deeply thank you. Wow. Did we just make history here or not? Yeah. We have just a few minutes left. We can go over just a bit, but I want to make sure that, or ask you to try to keep your comments, your personal comments, confined to just a sentence or two, and to try to ask some legitimate questions so that John has a chance to respond and we can get to as many folks as possible. And I have Terry right here, and then we'll go from there.
Well, thank you, John. This is the North American Unitarian Association, and there's a number of us Canadians here in the audience. And I just wanted to tell you that there's a saying that when America sneezes, Canada catches a cold, and we are catching lots of colds, and we're developing our own. But
I've noticed,
and we don't have the population issues with amongst black and white, but we certainly have the major issues of poverty and lack of education with our First Nations. Right. And we also experience that in that same sense that you can't talk about these things and you can't reason about them. You have to be silent on both sides to avoid, hurting each other. And my only comment, not a question, is just I really appreciated your talk, and it resonated with me. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So much. I want to maybe bounce back and forth. We have, I know, some folks on Zoom too, and we don't want to forget them, so I'm going to go over here and see if I recognize a name or see a hand up. Let's see. We've got, it looks like 75 folks on right now. I don't see any hands raised. Is there anybody on Zoom who has a question? Maybe go to the home page. That's usually where the top of the... There we go. Okay, Julie.
Todd,
Yeah.
There are two hands up on Zoom, one from Julie and one from Robin Edgar.
Okay, well, I didn't know if you wanted to respond to one of our many Canadians, and then we'll go to Julie.
Well, the only thing I would say is that, you're absolutely right. This is not the fundamental breakdown in our culture of relationship and reason is not strictly an American phenomenon. It is a reality that is overtaking not just Canada, but I think the West broadly speaking. And so, there is an international coalition, I think, to be built, and that I think is rising in support of some of our traditional liberal values and some of our higher moral traditions as a response to this decline. But we have to find each other. And so the fact that you're here, that this is a North American coalition, is a promising omen in that direction, I believe. So thank you.
Thank you. And then we'll have Julie on Zoom, and then we'll come back to the room. And Julie, what is your question for John? Oh, you might unmute your, see, I don't know.
I've never seen that Zoom setting.
Yeah. Julie, if you can unmute yourself.
Yeah,
Let's see,
if the host is able to unmute her, that might be helpful.
Yeah. Go ahead, Julie.
Okay. Oh, okay. You can hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. Because I couldn't unmute myself. I thank you for your presentation. It was very thought-provoking, very fascinating, and I'm curious. One thing I'm curious about with Braver Angels is that I see the polarization problem as being caused to a large degree by the fact that there are a lot of lies being spread and a lot of people believing them, so that you have people disagreeing not just on their opinions, but on the facts. For example, was January 6th a tourist visit, or was it an armed insurrection? I'm curious as to how Braver Angels deals with these issues where people disagree about what the facts actually are.
Yes, thank you very much for that question, Julie. And it is certainly the case that a major part of the conflagration of current times is the fact that we live in different empirical universes, seemingly. There's no doubt about that. And so when we're dealing with different environments of information, and you get the sense that you're not sharing the same reality, it can exacerbate a culture of distrust and dysfunction. But the philosophical position that I take and that Braver Angels takes is that our present divides, as much as they are exacerbated by the spread of disinformation, are not fundamentally a consequence of disinformation so much as they are a consequence of the erosion of trust between the American people and each other, and also between the American people and their institutions. And so what needs to be recognized, I think, is the fact that what allows us to exist in differing universes of information beyond the proliferation of media outlets and social media and so forth, and the structures in which that such disinformation proliferates, is the fact that we trust different authorities. You've got many people in American society who do not trust the mainstream media, who do not trust, generally speaking, the federal government or the public health establishment. Of course, you've got many other people who don't trust the Republican Party, who don't trust Republican leaders in Congress and when they're in the White House, and don't trust a lot of culture makers in the churches and so forth. And so what that means is that in the absence of trust, it really doesn't matter whether or not CNN is telling you a fact or fiction if you don't believe them because they are CNN in the first place. And it really doesn't matter if CNN has, just for example, has the right information on a given subject if they precede the delivery of true facts with language or framings of issues that seem explicitly or implicitly to villainize half of the country they presumably are talking to. And again, all this goes for Fox News as well and any other outlet you can name. The fundamental point is that social trust is prerequisite to an environment in which facts and empirical truth can actually spread and be accepted in the first place, which is why our, I would say, Unitarian conception of reason is something that must rest along the foundation of understanding, is one that is fundamental for the country to remember in the first place.
Great response. Actually, I saw Helen with her hand up first, or? I answered my own question. Oh, you answered your own, and then I saw Frank, and then we're going to go back to Zoom, and then we'll come back here, and I think I saw Shane, and then Dick. So, Frank?
Thanks, John. That was really interesting, very interesting. In fact, I recently read something, the author of which I'm not going to remember, the details of which I'm not going to remember, but the gist was that Braver Angels is experiencing something akin to what Unitarian Universalism has just gone through. Could you address to that? Can anybody hear me? Did you hear me, John?
Yes. Well, I'm not sure that. So I mean, my understanding, of course, is that Unitarian Universalists are experiencing something of a schism, which is deep and difficult. I wouldn't say that Braver Angels is going through that, except that you might look at Braver Angels sort of by its nature as being a community that experiences regular schisms, sort of on a daily and weekly and yearly sort of basis. I mean, and that much is true. It is. Braver Angels is a novel community because it is a community in some sense based on difference. Granted, the deeper commonality of a commitment to the idea that goodwill and the restoration of trust provides the foundation for democracy to live up to its promise, that we have in common, as well as something that I refer to as patriotic empathy, this idea that our love for our country is demonstrated in the concern and the compassion that we bear for our fellow Americans. But I will tell you that, there are certain things that make the project predictably difficult. Just to give you an example, Braver Angels actually has a thriving debate culture that has evolved over the years. And in the aftermath of the 2020 election, we made the decision to host community debates on the subject of voter fraud, including President Trump's claims that the election was stolen. And that was a decision that outraged many of our members and many other people because the fear was that this was opening up the doors for the further dissemination of misinformation. And so we lost hundreds of members at that time and even had donors indicate that they might pull their funding and had many critical people online and so forth, many angry messages, many of them addressed directly to me, as I recall. But my response and our response was that if you don't allow people to speak from the vantage point of their earnestly held convictions and opinions, you'll never be able to create an inclusive community in which they can develop some trust for what you have to say and for what the truth in your perspective might be in the first place. And so my response precisely parallels the point that was raised earlier about mistrust of facts and information. We have to create the context for us to trust each other, and you cannot do that if you are shutting down the conversations to begin with. And so, we had those events, and lo and behold, people learned from each other. People continued left and right within the context of Brave Our Angels community to be in dialogue on the subject of election fraud, of voter suppression, of concerns about the electoral system, left, right, and center. And what followed that was a 3-year project that brought together 200 members of Brave Our Angels, left, right, and center, who had this whole spectrum of concerns, who participated in a series of workshops, 26 across the country, held in 25 states, if I recall correctly, in which through deep deliberation based on exercises meant to strengthen social trust across the divide, they came away with 787 points of consensus and agreement on values and policy reforms that could be made towards the electoral system. That was then distilled down to a document that focused in on about 20 key recommendations in a document called the Trustworthy Elections Report, which Brave Our Angels is now putting forward as something that can help chart a path towards some consensus in American society around the ways in which we can reform the system in a way that all Americans, left, right, and center, can trust. We were able to do that because we were willing to talk to each other with an open mind and trust in each other to begin with. And so to me, that just proves the point.
So I think we're going to do just 2 more. I know there's a lot of hands up, but we've already run out of time. And my gosh, every time John concludes a comment, it almost should be the conclusion of his speech because it's just so brilliant. But I did tell Robin that we would get to him, and then we'll give Shane the last word. So Tom, if you want to take your mic towards Shane over here. We'll go with Robin and then Shane, and then we'll let John make his concluding remark in response to Shane. So, Robin, go ahead. Robin Edgar.
Do you mean me?
Yes.
Robin,
Yes.
Thank you very much. I wasn't sure because I think there's another Robin out there in the real life audience. This was a very interesting presentation, and I heard John speak about a American war zone that his wife lived through. And as a Canadian, as an outsider looking south, going back even more than a decade, I saw and still see what I call a civil war of words. And I think, there is the possibility of a shooting war, an actual civil war in the USA between left and right, Republicans and Democrats, and so on and so forth. And I would ask John, first of all, if he agrees that that's an actual possibility. Also, if it is, what can we do to prevent that?
Thank you very much for the happy question. One little nuance of American history that is lost to the recollection of most of us is the fact that what the issue that really sparked the Civil War, if we're going to be precise about it, was not really so much the question of whether or not to abolish slavery, but whether or not to restrict the continuing expansion of slavery. That seems like, sort of a fine hair in some sense, but obviously there's a big difference between those two things. And if you were to zoom in on the debates that Abraham Lincoln was having on the eve of or in the years running up to the Civil War, Lincoln had a very He had a very nuanced position, and yet a very deeply passionate position of conviction on this matter, in which, on the one hand, he said that slavery, slavery is wrong, if slavery is not wrong, then nothing is wrong. That slavery was truly a moral abomination. But that, on the other hand, many good and decent people believed that slavery was acceptable because they had been taught that and conditioned to think that way, on the basis of all sorts of interests that were influential in the South, that were commercially tied to the institution of slavery, etc. And Lincoln believed, or at least wanted to believe, that if in the newly added American territories, slavery could be prohibited to prevent it from expanding to places where it was not, while allowing it to retain a legal foundation for continuing to exist in the places that it currently was, that the American people could reason together with a spirit of charity and morality to undo the abominable institution over time without bloodshed, coating and staining the land. That failed to materialize in the 1860s. On the other hand, in the 1960s, you had an organized effort, again, led by Martin Luther King Jr. and Bayard Rustin and Septima Clark, supported by the likes of Rabbi Abraham Herschel, Billy Graham to a degree, and many other Americans, that sought to take the descendant issue of American slavery, racial segregation, and indeed, although the phrase wasn't in vogue, but a genuinely systematic and cultural racism in American society, and certainly concentrated in the South. And they launched an organized campaign to appeal to the conscience of the white South, of the evangelical church, and of America. And there was violence in those years, but the example of nonviolence genuinely succeeded in accomplishing significant structural reforms in American society and in effecting a genuine transformation in the conscience of American culture on issues of race. America in the 1860s didn't have the benefit of that sort of organized movement of the people to appeal to the conscience of the opposition in a way that might have created the space for that sort of moral reconciliation. Now, I can't speak definitively in terms of what may or may not have been able to happen in the 1860s. The abolitionist movement was noble and self-righteous and prone towards political conflict, and that's the way politics typically is. But the reason Braver Angels exists, the reason our civic renewal movement exists, this bridging movement to cross the partisan divide in goodwill, is to create an infrastructure of social change, conversation, collaboration, and reconciliation that, to the degree to which we may be in danger of tipping into violence in American society as a logical outgrowth of our inability to talk to each other, because what is politics and democracy anyway, other than the substitution of words for violence, that we may be able to create social and cultural momentum towards goodwill in a way that averts the looming potential of violence in American society. We are testing ourselves to see if by the power of agape love and goodwill, we cannot set America on a course that resembles more of the course of the nonviolent movement than it does that of the Civil War. And I pray to God that we succeed. Thank you.
All right, Shane, please go ahead.
Thanks. Thanks so much for being here. At the beginning of your talk, you described yourself as a hope and change Republican, or at least you were at the time. Yeah. And I remember you once, I think this is maybe even more provocative, you once called yourself a social justice conservative. And I wonder if you could explain what you mean by that, because I think that's going to sound oxymoronical in a lot of people's ears. But I like the phrase.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. Actually, I think I've explained most of what I mean by that in the scope of my talk here today. I believe that American society has made dramatic progress in the direction of living up to the principles of the Declaration of Independence and achieving a society that has genuine material opportunity, but also social inclusion available to people of all races and all good faith creeds. And yet, there are still inequalities and injustices in American society, which shows that there is work yet to be done. There is still the reality that for so much of American society, we have not, whether it be along racial lines or political lines, fully lived up to the ethos implicit in Dr. King's vision, Dr. King's language, and in what I believe to be the spirit of the America that Abraham Lincoln and Thomas Jefferson believed in. But I think that the way towards that greater outcome of true social justice has to involve conserving a commitment to true American values. And that includes a commitment to liberty, a commitment to justice, a commitment to freedom of thought, freedom of discussion, freedom of speech, and again, a deeper commitment to understanding and agape love, the principle that you love your neighbor as you love yourself, and that you love your enemies. Should be easy enough to do in politics, right? But we have to, but they're things that in the present day, in the rush towards judgmentalism, in the rush towards tribalism, in the rush towards ideological warfare, have to be conserved, right? And this is why you have so many, I think, erstwhile political liberals today who find themselves in the sort of rhetorically paradoxical position of saying, I am a liberal because I'm having to conserve liberalism, which also makes me a conservative. And so, but it's, let's not get bogged down in the language. Labels are necessary but imperfect tools for being able to communicate what we want to say. There are things that are good in American values and in American traditions that we need to hold on to today, even as we strive on a path forward towards a greater realization of freedom, justice, and equality in American life. And so you can't have true social justice without conserving the traditions that would make social justice possible. That's what makes me a social justice conservative.
This is incredibly rich, but as a speaker myself, I am absolutely in awe and appreciative of just how long you have been on your feet and on the mark at the same time. So we want to give you a break now with much appreciation. We still have some time before lunch, so what I'm going to encourage you to do in a few moments is just take a break, enjoy the property, enjoy each other, communicate with each other. Oh, I'm going to get to that. Promise. Yeah. So. And talk to each other about what you've heard. Don't let this go leave without some takeaways for you today. And then in a moment, I'm also going to escort John to the reception area. We are going to be led in songs also before you leave. So don't before you go to the reception area yourself. We're going to have a little bit of music. So I wanted to get all that out of the way so that I could say again how profoundly grateful we are, I know all of us, that you cared so much and were so passionate enough to come here and be with us today in what is really a historic meeting for us, and to come to bring your brilliance, to bring your heart, and to bring your bravery, through which I think you have overwhelmingly encouraged us. So you truly are our braver angel. Thank you so much to John Wood Jr.
Thank you all. Truly been an honor for me. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you kindly.
So we picked out one of the great things about our UU tradition. We're going to get me on the microphone here in just a minute. Yeah. If you like to read the music look for number 1018 in the hymnal, and I'm hoping that we're going to have the words up on the screen. Is that right, Shelley?
It's not 1018, it's not this one. Do you want 1018 first?
Yeah, we're going to do 1018 first.
Then we'll finish with
Oh, wait a minute. Okay, you got the other mic on. Okay. All right, we'll use this mic. She's got it? Yeah, 1018. All right, Pat's going to play it through. While you're standing up here, let's do a song that is of a completely different tradition that is also in our hymnal, number 1, which we always called Prayer for This House, but it's May Nothing Evil Cross This Door. Now, this is from the European tradition of harmony, so if you're a harmony singer, sing the harmony. Okay.
May nothing evil cross this door.
Thank you.
So I want to thank all of you for being here for this morning in our keynote presentation. John is here if you want to talk to him. Okay, sorry, the other mic. John is here if you want to talk to him or go in the back reception area and chat. We also have a couple of other announcements. There is a basket by the door to help the church pay for a cost of keeping us warm on these cold days if you'd like to make a donation. And then secondly, we're going to have a little group up here in the front. If you have any other questions, things we haven't brought up or included on the schedule of the summit, please come up here and chat with us for a few minutes.
everybody, I've muted Spokane.
I don't believe Spokane is muted. I'm talking. So. Okay, so we'll have a little discussion group up here in the front. Lunch will not be until 12, so we have some time to talk to John or, take a little walk or have a little conversation. So we'll look forward to having you for lunch at 12. Thank you.